Well, this time of year, I have a lot of what I think of as straggler plants that have been driving me crazy all winter long because I've just got them pushed back in corners. I don't have a greenhouse. They start looking ugly and tattered and they just get irksome. And a lot of times they get to the irksome point so badly that I just relegate them to the compost pile. I just can't stand to have them around anymore. But this year, and this video is about my not doing that, specifically with 3 different kinds of plants. Now, you guys saw an example of this last year. This is my first plant, and that would be amaryllis. Now, after Christmas, I have all sorts of these, as I bet you do. You've just got lots of bulbs that bloomed before or after the holidays, and now you've got these pots of them. And if you're extremely responsible and resourceful, and if you have a greenhouse, it's pretty easy to do something with these where you let the foliage die back, you let them kind of go dormant, and then in the summer you feed them again, and then you maybe or maybe not can get them to come back out again at Christmas time. But again, that takes more room and maybe more thought that I want to give to it. So here is my number 1, kind of a surprising container planting that can move from indoors to outdoors and really make a spectacular impact in your container planting. So here is what I do. I get a large pot, and I used to be really fastidious about making sure that all of them were the same variety in each individual pot, and lately I've not been so good about that. But you know what? It's okay. It's kind of fun. I never know what's going to bloom what color. And last year I planted a bunch of these. So these are ones that bloomed not this Christmas, but last Christmas. So that would be Christmas of 2020. And after they finished blooming, when they were about at this stage, I potted them up in a big pot, and then I overwintered them. I let this kind of continue to grow. I put it inside over the winter. I think I had these in my basement. I kind of watered them sparingly. And then in the summertime, I brought them out. So when it got past my last average frost date, I brought these out and I put them and positioned them on my patio. All summer long, I let them continue to grow on with their strappy foliage. I fed them a lot. I watered them a lot until about August. In August, I quit watering them. I took this pot and I put it indoors. Now, before it was really cold, I just had these in my garage. When it got to be below freezing, I put them in my studio out here where they were just so annoyingly in Stuart's way, weren't they? Weren't they, Stuart? And so, but now, because it's above freezing, it's been very nice. I put them back outside, and in almost no time at all, look what has happened. So I have all of these wonderful, wonderful stalks about to bloom. So let's count. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. At this point I have, is that 7, Stuart? I think I have 7. And the other pot is starting to put out some buds too. I think I've got 1 on there right now, but I think those will definitely put out more blooms later. Now, last year they spit some of these stalks and these blooms out later in the summer. I think maybe it was in June or July. This year they're doing it earlier. It's hard to get them to bloom on cue during the holidays or around the holidays again, but I don't care, because even when they're not in bloom, they make just a spectacular foliage plant with this wonderful strappy glossy foliage. And they have just really, really done beautifully. And I think amaryllis here's my question of the day, if you guys know, are they native to South Africa? And what do you do with your amaryllis? after they have finished blooming. But I just put these outside and they make a gorgeous planter, whether it's just completely evergreen or it puts out magnificent stalks like this. So that's a really fun and economical way, I think, to kind of take something like this that looks rather lackluster and pitiful and giving it a second light and a second life. And by the way, if these leaves start looking kind of grody, or if I plant them up and some of them die, then I just cut them back, continue to feed the bulb, and it turns out that they will survive and later perform just beautifully. So this is my number one kind of unexpected indoor-outdoor plant that you might want to put out this summer. Now again, I will give myself a little bit of credit. Part of the reason I don't keep some of these plants over is because I just have a limited amount of space indoors and outdoors, and my husband has to live here too. I can't completely have nothing but plants. So in my defense, that is why I sometimes discard them after the end of the season, after the growing season when they're spent. And a classic example of that are Boston fern. I get a number of Boston fern seemingly every year, and then I will forget about them, I'll not bring them in, and there'll be a hard freeze and they expire. And then they just end up in the compost pile. Well, I've gotten better, and this year I remembered to bring this one in, and I continued to water it rather sparingly, even feed it just a tiny bit after the calendar turned. So in January I started feeding it just a little bit, and lo and behold, it's going to be just fine, and I don't have to buy another Boston fern for this area. Now, something that I have learned to do so that lots of these annoying fronds don't start falling all over the place and all of these little petals get all of you over your living room and things, I don't bring them in an area where I really want them to have too much decorative value. I just cut them all the way back, and then I just bring them inside where it won't be freezing. In other words, I'm just kind of storing them. I'm not really showcasing them in any way. So when the calendar turned about in January, then I started feeding them gently, and when the temperature wasn't freezing, and it looks like for the next 10 days it's not going to freeze, then I brought it back outside. Now you may say this looks like it's in way too much sun for a shade-loving plant, and it is, but eventually this whole area will be shaded out and this spot will be just fine. Now, the downside to bringing some of these plants out is then if you're outside and there's a day when it's extremely windy and extremely warm like it's been recently, then you have to remember to water them, something that I don't typically like to have to remember to do this early in March. But nevertheless, it helps me save money, save this plant, and it's another example of bringing something indoors, putting it back outdoors for summer. Let's go on to number 3. Well, here's another example of being a little bit thriftier, thriftier, and more conscientious about the plants that you use during the winter, saving them so they can thrive, or if not thrive, at least survive and endure until you can put them out in the summer. And some of those for me are ivies. So oftentimes I'll have some kind of composition. Sometimes I might have an amaryllis display. It might be a bulb display in late winter. Who knows what it might be. But I end up with just some ivies like this. And if I am not careful and not attentive, I'll forget to water them. The rest of the display was past its prime and was discarded. And I'll just stick these someplace and not always remember that I've got them. But this year, I'm resolved to be better about that. So this was a case in point. I think this came from Trader Joe's. It had some different bulbs that were blooming in it. I took them out, and then I had this kind of just leftover ivy. Well, now that it looks like we're not going to get another freeze, or hopefully we won't, I'm going to bring this outside and I'm going to plant it in my back window box off of my kitchen window where some of the ivy from past years expired in that Arctic freeze of February of last year. So that's another another example of how I'm taking something that was inside as a house plant and bringing it outside and using it in my landscape. And you can do that with other kind of trailing plants that maybe you got in some kind of compositional planter as a gift or at Christmas time, and try not to waste them. So I have been all too guilty of that in the past, of wasting what were really good plants because I neglected them, I discarded them, and I just really didn't give them a second life in the garden. But this year, I've got 3 examples of plants that I'm going to bring from the inside to the outside, and I'm going to give them a second chance in my summer garden. Ooh, Stuart, I need to put my jacket back on, I think. It's gotten cold again now that the sun has gone back under. If you've held on this long, here's my outfit of the day. My hoops are just some of my classic hoops that you can get almost anywhere. I think I got these online. My sweater is the one you guys may have seen if you watched the episode where I talked about lots of thrifting finds that I found at Goodwill here recently. I talked about this sweater and how I was going to style it with white jeans, though today I don't have on white because I'm working in the garden. My breeches are also thrifted. These are Ann Taylor Loft, and my boots are, I think these are Forever 21, and my sunglasses are Target. So there you go. There's my outfit of the day.